Heard of the 3D camera in After Effects, but you're kind of intimidated by it? Don't be. Let me demystify it for you. I'll have you making the most of the 3D camera in just a few minutes. I'm Jess for Envato Tuts Plus, and I'm a professional motion and graphic designer. And I too was once very mystified by this tool, but no longer. In this quick tip, we'll look at how to set up the camera in After Effects the easy way, get full control over your scene with the camera position and rotation, and add depth to your animation to create a 3D universe. So let's go from flat to fabulous. Alright, so welcome to After Effects, my favorite program. And I've got a little thing already going here, which is going to explain the 3D camera to you. It's pretty common in my job that I'll get a bit of a storyboard like this, and not really any detail on how to move between these two frames. So the 3D camera is a great way to add a little bit more spice to your animations and really blow the socks off your clients. Because we could go for something really simple like this and just use a couple nulls to get this pan effect, and then, stack it up with another null at the end to get a scale and all that stuff. But it gets quite complicated quite quickly when you're using just stacks of nulls or pre-comps or something, and it's a bit less flexible. And especially when you need to work fast, this isn't always the best way. So I'm going to show you how we can instead do this same thing, but with a 3D camera. We can also get some really interesting effects with the camera that we can't do like this. Okay, so a camera in After Effects works with 3D elements. So let's add a camera first. If you go right click, new camera. Usually I don't change any of these settings, but a 50 or 35mm lens is usually good. Let's go 50 here. I've never used the 1-node camera before. I'm sure there's a place that you can use it, but 2-node is always safe as well. Hit OK, and we get this little camera down here. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a null, new null object. We'll bring him to the top, and we're going to call it cam control. And then parent our camera to this cam control and make sure it's a 3D layer as well. So now basically we're going to forget that the camera exists and we're going to use all the position of this camera from this null. And I'll show you why. So everything that you want to be affected by a camera needs to be a 3D layer. So I'm going to go through and make everything in here a 3D layer as well. And I do that by coming down here and selecting them all, clicking this button here, which is the 3D layer. If you don't see this, you can right click up here, columns, and turn on switches for that one. I've left the background as a 2D layer because I don't want the background to be affected by my camera. I want it to stay as it is. So anything that is still a 2D layer will just be ignored basically by the camera and will stay exactly as it is. Thanks to Envato Elements for making this little tutorial possible. Elements, if you haven't heard, is a subscription service for creative assets like video templates, stock footage, music, fonts, and more. You get access to it all with one subscription. So to learn more, check out the link in the description below. All right, let's get back to our 3D camera. So now if I move this null around, if I open up the position, you can see also because we're in a 3D layer now, we have 3 values. You've got your X, side to side, you've got your Y, top and down, and you've got your Z, which is the most exciting one, which is basically in and out. It's zoom in depth. So that is a pretty powerful thing we've just added to our composition. Now, let me show you the difference between using the camera positions and using the null. So if we go over here, you can see 2 views, which is also a pretty handy thing. This is our active camera view point, and this is the top view, and you can change this as well to be this one's the one that's changing. You can change this to be left, top, back, right, whatever you prefer to do, but usually I only use the top just to see where my elements in a scene are in relation to my camera. So if I was to move the camera by itself, you can see that's our little camera there, and if I wanted to change its position, you can see it's moving the camera as the orbit point basically of this comp. So it's moving the scene based on where the camera is. But if I move the position of the cam control, which is over here where our scene is, it's the orbit point basically of this scene now. And so the camera will follow it, i.e. the camera is following your the center of your scene where your elements are is always going to be what your camera's looking at. So I generally find that's a better way to control what you're working with, because sometimes, or I find in particular, I don't know if it's just me, I'm sure other people see it differently, but sometimes I get really confused and lose sight basically of my composition because it's not being the center focal point at all times, and the camera gets, sometimes it can be quite hard to reset the camera as well once you've got keyframes. So anyway, this is just, for me, a much safer, easier, straightforward way to do it, especially for simple motion graphics like we're doing today. So now we can basically do the exact same thing that we had in our comp before with the nulls, but instead with the position of this cam control. So if I set some keyframes, say I want, what was it, about 3 seconds, we want to pan over, so I'm gonna jump, I'll give it about 10 frames. We want to pan over to this scene. We can do that really easily, the same way you can do it with the nulls. One tip that I would recommend you do is always, when you're working with the 3D camera, it's quite a good idea to keep on some kind of grid. Either up here you can have the title action safe, I always work with this, or if you've got some really kind of strict gridded design, bring in that grid, or even you can bring in reference imagery like the bring in your still that you have to match and line up things that way, because the one maybe big downside of a 3D layer is that you can't align 3D layers, which is, it makes sense, but it's a bit lame when you're trying to be a nice, neat designer and match your style frame. So yeah, I always make sure, for instance, if I'm moving this over, that this is going to be center as best I can. Sometimes motion design, it's a bit of an eyeballing game. Especially with a 3D camera. So best of all, use the reference image. But today I'm going to be a bit loosey-goosey with this. Let's add some ease to this. So we're going to right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, or if you have some cool plugins that also do that, you can do that too. And now we have that same pan motion. And you might be like, Jess, that looks worse, and it's exactly the same. What is the benefit of this camera? Well, you remember how in this comp, if I wanted to have a scale, I would have to do that on a different layer because our scale point of this null is all the way over here, and I had to add a new null and blah, blah, blah. Gets difficult. With the camera, we can move in Z depth to get that exact scale and move all our elements at once without having to think so much about what comp is where and where all these elements are. But what if we wanted to have the pan across and then we want to have the scale in? Because right now these are all on the same one. Well, we can separate these dimensions. So if you right click on your position, you can go separate dimensions, and now we have separate keyframed layers for each dimension of movement, which is super, super cool. So in this particular animation, I don't really want a Y movement. We're just going X side to side. And then later on in the comp, we're gonna have that scale in movement down the end. So it's always good to have a little bit of a bounce. So we're gonna go out a bit, and then we're gonna go bam towards the camera. So moving in and out of Z space like that, very simply. It's looking okay. It's nothing fabulous. Let's add a really cool effect that really then takes this to the next level, and it's parallax. And this is where we're really using the full benefits of the camera. So this is where it can get a bit finicky. And again, you should definitely keep your reference frames handy, but we can set these elements in Z space as well. The elements of our scene, we can set them in different areas of Z space to give a parallax effect to our movement. So I'll just pre-compose this text so we're all together. And make sure that it's a 3D layer again. And if we hit position P on the keyboard, we've got 3 dimensions here now as well. So if I move this back, you can see it's going behind this image because that image is this stills frame, which is at 0 in the Z space. But if I was to make this, negative 136, it's going to go right behind it because it's 1 pixel now behind that text frame. So let's spread these out over the Z space, and you can again turn on your top view if you want to kind of get a bit of a better idea of where things are sitting. I'm going to move this text frame really far up. So I reckon for a really exaggerated movement, you want to be somewhere around the like -5,000 type zone. And it's gone because it's really close to the camera. So what we're going to do is, actually, is it even past? It's past the camera. Maybe I went too far. You can see here, that's the layer that I just moved in Z space, and there's our camera. So we're probably never going to see that if I leave it at -5,000. So actually, you can also, if you want to do it manually, you can move it this way using that little tiny blue arrow is our Z space. So you can do it that way. I generally like to stick with numbers so that I know where the rest of the elements are in relation. So maybe like negative, what was it? We were just at -2,000-ish. So maybe like -1,500 is good. But we still can't see it because it's really big. So then I'm going to scale it back down to the frame size. So now it looks like it did before, pretty much. But you can see that that is now moving faster than the frame below it because it's closer to the camera, which is like when you look out, the window of a moving train and the mountains in the background are moving really slow, but the trees close to the train are moving really fast. It's the exact same principle. It's just physics. Okay, so we can do that to all of our elements to give them a little bit more of an interesting in and exit. And I will go ahead and do that to these elements and then check in again. Some are moving back in space, some are moving forward, and I'm just going through and adjusting the scale to get them back to what they look like in the style frame. Again, if I was doing this really seriously, I'd be matching this very closely to the style frame, but I'm just being a bit laissez-faire with it for this. Just going to adjust this easing as well, so we've got a slow start and a slow out. You can access the graph editor by selecting your keyframes and clicking this little button, and then you can adjust these as you like. The steeper the curve, the faster the animation. That's always the rule. If you're in, the value graph, which is where I prefer to work, but you can also use the speed graph, which follows the same principles. Steeper the curve, slower the motion. Cool. Okay, so you can see there that we've got some movement happening. This one's going really fast because he's really close to the camera. But there's a bit of a problem in that our scenes are quite close together physically, and this one is coming on, when it's popping on, it's in scene. And I think it's going to look altogether better if we make this more exaggerated. So this is the big difference. When using a null, you can kind of have all of your stuff here, but when you're using the camera, sometimes it's better to really drag this movement out so that it's quite far, and then select all your elements. And because, none of them, we're using the camera to do all this motion, none of them are keyframed anyway, so you can move the position really like wherever you want. It's quite a flexible way of working, and that's, I think, why I really like it, because it's very fluid and it really heroes the motion of the scene over anything else. And now if we watch that back now that it's a bit further away, there we go, there's a bit more space. We could even, add a few more of these in here so that it's whooshing past, a bunch of things, and really gets that experience of, or feeling like it's a bit of a world and a bit of a universe you're creating here of these elements on different planes. All right, but we can also add some more things. So I'm going to add, right to the start, we're going to put a keyframe on our Z position, and then put a keyframe right at the end where we want this pan to happen. And I'm just going to add a slow zoom in. So if we pan this back out slightly, and then I'm going to go into my graph editor, and you can see this curve we're starting to create on the Z, which is our in and out push and pull. We've got a nice smooth, we want kind of a pretty flat line here so that it's just gradually zooming in. That that is already just way more interesting. And then here, I think the pan is probably enough, but what if we want to add, I don't know, some rotation to this particular scene? So maybe by the time it gets here, let's add, we've got all these rotation tools as well, which is pretty cool. And I really think it's quite effective when you spin in kind of this, in, what is it, Y. Y always looks pretty cool. So I think I want it to be about here, and then spin round slowly, maybe to like there. Can be pretty subtle. And then obviously we don't want it at the start, so I'm just going to reset that to 0. And then this keyframe. So what we're going to do is we'll have the pan, and as it's panning, I want it to flip to that. What is that? About 30 degrees? I like round numbers. And then before the end, we'll have it slowly over this whole segment. Bam. We'll have it slowly rotate back, and you've got these cool bits. And then by the time it is here for this final push in, it'll be back to straight on rotation. We can do the same, easy ease these boys. We can look at the same curves for this as well. So, you know, maybe we want this, maybe we want it to spin pretty evenly the whole time, but maybe actually, oh yeah, because we don't really want this bit to be rotated, but we want the rotation to really kick in about there. So I'm just going to pull that curve. Oh yeah, snappy. So there's one last thing that we need to note when using the 3D camera, and I will show you with this sweet little, where is he? He's over here because we have moved our scene so much out of the way. He's gotten lost. So if you lose an element, you're like, where is this? If you scroll really far out, you'll probably be able to find it somewhere else. Okay, so this is our little end explode animation that I made, which I want to kind of kick in when this kind of punches in, and then boof, we go through this tunnel, right? I have made this in a pre-comp. And you can see here it's just a bunch of these circles scaling and also moving in Z space. So over time, these get closer towards the camera. And there's another camera in this comp, right? Doing the same thing. So this camera is moving in Z space through this tunnel as they are also coming towards it. So let's, you know, in 2 views, here are all our tunnels, they're going back. And then the camera there you can see is moving, starting to move through those ones. That's, you know, it's a pretty cool little effect you can do. But one thing to note is that if you have collapse transformations on, which is this little trigger here, it basically overrides that camera and is using this camera now. So this is gonna not really work as well. So that's just one thing to be aware of, is that, you know, you might want to have, like, for instance, the reason I did this is because I wanted this to have a more exaggerated movement than I wanted these elements to move, because these are moving kind of slowly out of frame. And I wanted this burst to be really exaggerated, so it's a bit faster and a bit punchier, which is why I've added a second camera. So we're just going to keep collapse transformations off. But this is still a 3D layer, so it is still being affected by this camera as well. So you get kind of like the double movement, but it's not only being affected by that camera, if that makes sense. There's a lot of tweaking that I would still do to this, but it's pretty clear, I think, on the benefits of the camera. One final quick tip that I will show you, that because the camera, you know, it's an endless tool. There is so much you can do with it, and it is very cool. But one of my favorite things to do is turn on depth of field. So in this little comp, you know, imagine this is like a little cool social post or something. I've got this text, it's all pretty boring, nothing is really happening. But if I chuck this into a 3D layer and I've got a camera, here I'm not gonna move the camera, so I haven't worried about a null. So all I've got is this normal camera, exactly the same settings as you would have before. And I'm going to rotate this piece of text so that it's on you know, I love the angles, on a bit of an angle. One other thing that's good to note with the camera is just to make sure that you are watching the resolution of your pre-comps, because for instance here I'm scaling this up quite a bit and it still looks okay, but you know, you get too big and it might start to look a bit grainy, especially with images and things like that. So it's not a hard and fast rule that scaling it over 100 is going to ruin the resolution of it, but because things are in space as well, but just be mindful and make sure your pre-comps are, double size of basically what your end comp is, and you should be fine. So we've changed the rotation of this. It's kind of on a fun angle. That's cool. And if we go up to the camera, twirl it open and twirl out camera options and turn on depth of field, and nothing's really happening. Why? It's because our aperture is quite low. So usually I just go in and crank this up until I can see what's happening, and then I'll go back and refine exactly how much blur I want using things like focus distance and blur levels. So if we open up again our two views, here's our camera, here is our text layer, and you open this, our focus distance currently is it's this pink line here, so it's right at the end of that camera. There we go, you can see a little bit better. This is our focus distance, and you can see how that's affecting our comp here. As the focus distance pushes into where it's interacting with our comp here, it gets clearer, which is pretty cool. So you can animate the focus distance by setting a keyframe. So I might want it to start really blurry and then, in 3 seconds come into focus. And because this is on an angle as well, and this focus distance isn't hitting straight on, we're getting a little bit of blur at the edges too, because the focus is right in the middle, here, basically, of this comp, which I think is quite a cool effect. And if you were to animate, maybe, I don't know how well this is because it's gonna come out of, it's gonna come out of frame, but you can animate something like that through the focus distance as well, which I think is a really cool effect that you can add. But yeah, there's also a whole bunch of different types of blur that you can put on this. They get some of these ones, nonagons and stuff, get a bit chunky, but it'll give you a smoother blur. Basically, the more blades you have in your iris shape, if you're talking about a real camera, so maybe it's good to work with the shorter ones until you're happy with the animation, and then if you really want a nice clean blur, bump it up to this before you export. And you can also change the blur level as well. So if you're like, I just want a little bit of blur, you can change that percentage down, or you can crank it up to loads. So it's a really fun little nifty trick, and useful in a lot of ways. This is a very basic way to use it, but you can set up whole big scenes where you have trees in the foreground and a background and a character layer. There's so much that the camera allows you to do, so I hope that you're not scared by it anymore. So that's how I use the 3D camera in my projects. I hope that has helped explain how, when, and why to use the camera in After Effects. Let me know down in the comments how you use the camera, because I'd really love to hear about it. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please also consider subscribing. Until next time, stay fabulous.